welcome in to another episode of Third Round Reversal. Brett Malamud here, along with Zach Malamud. Zach, what's going on?
Not much. We're got another episode, a good one today.
And we start with the big news today. Deandre Hopkins, D-Hop, has been cut by the Arizona Cardinals. Zach, let's talk fantasy implications a little bit here. First, from the Dynasty perspective, if you own DeAndre Hopkins, are you trading him? Are you keeping him? What do you think?
You got to keep him right now. I think you got to wait and find out where he's going to go because some team is going to give him a contract. He's going to be somewhere this season in the NFL. It just didn't work out in Arizona, and they were looking to trade him. So they couldn't find that option. They end up releasing him, hold on to him in Dynasty, and then figure things out once you find out where he's going to end up heading.
Yeah, and I think we have a little bit until those redraft leagues come in, which is why we just talked Dynasty with this one. And yeah, there's a few teams out there that can peg him in as their wide receiver one. A lot of teams in the AFC East, a couple teams in the NFC East. And then, there's some AFC West teams that could obviously use him as well, and the Chiefs and the Chargers. So it'll be interesting to see where he lands. But I think for now, just status quo, hold on to him and don't really, entertain any offers till you really know where he's going.
Yeah, completely agree. There's no need really to even entertain offers right now. I mean, he's on your team for a reason. You drafted him for a reason. He's a big time player, can really step up and be a wide receiver one for you. You keep him right now while you're waiting to find out where he's going to end up heading to.
And one of those dark horse teams, as we start to get into the AFC East, and we'll also be covering the AFC North, is the New York Jets. Now, they don't really need a wide receiver. There is the potential that Corey Davis could be cut. They can rearrange some contracts. Obviously, D-Hop would need to take less money to go to a team like the Jets, but to play with Aaron Rodgers, compete for a championship. As we start to get in here, let's talk Jets football. And totally changed the landscape was this Aaron Rodgers trade. Rodgers comes in and immediately most of their guys' values go up.
Yeah, completely. And Aaron Rodgers, last year, he finished 13th in PPR leagues and 3,600 yards. I mean, that's a great season from Aaron Rodgers. 26 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. That's a good ratio, even though Aaron Rodgers not known for throwing too many interceptions. But I think fantasy owners have to give Aaron Rodgers a bit of a pass from this past year. No wide receiver one without Devontae Adams in Green Bay, and he kind of struggled without having that number one guy, that go-to wide receiver. Threw it a little bit more to the running backs and Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, but he's going to slot right into this Jets offense. Of course, the coaches around him, Nathaniel Hackett, is going to be working with him again. I think this Jets offense is going to be rolling under Aaron Rodgers. Looking at Breece Hall at running back, in the 7 games he played, he finished running back 7. I don't know how he's going to be built into the offense this year, but those are phenomenal numbers for only playing 7 games. A red-hot start from a rookie running back. Of course, you have to wait and see how the ACL works out and if he can get back to 100% from that injury a season ago. But really great signs from Breece Hall this past year. Looking at the wide receiver room, it's a little bit crowded. Even if you add a guy like D-Hop, it'll probably add to the chaos. There's 4 or 5 guys that can really be strong wide receiver ones, wide receiver twos for the Jets this year. But 2 guys specifically stand out. Garrett Wilson, he finished 21st, only 4 touchdowns, though. That was tied for the second least of anyone in the top 25. You want a little bit more touchdown production from Garrett Wilson. And then Allen Lazard, the wide receiver one for Aaron Rodgers a season ago in Green Bay. He finished wide receiver 35. I mean, that's pretty solid. He didn't play the full season, Lazard did, but he's just another option that Aaron Rodgers will be familiar with. So another option for the Jets. Mecole Hardman, Corey Davis, Denzel Mims. I think they're all not the best options. I think you can really take a flare on him maybe once in a while, especially Mecole Hardman. A lot of big plays and maybe some rushing ability out of the backfield. But then we go to the wide receiver, the tight end room, excuse me. And Tyler Conklin, he finished tight end 16 a season ago. You also have CJ Uzama there. I don't think there's really a great option of those two. I mean, one might go off more than the other one. You can kind of figure it out as the season goes on with those tight ends.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of great points there. With Rodgers, it's interesting. We talked earlier about how those weapons kind of are really good from a football perspective, and obviously if they added DeAndre Hopkins, then you're putting yourself in a good spot to win football games, but probably not as much from a fantasy perspective. Rodgers, though, 12 interceptions, you mentioned before, his highest number since 2008. He finished in the top 15 in quarterbacks, though. I still think that he is that kind of a player where he's on that very edge of the quarterback one, probably more quarterback two, though. I think those days of Rodgers being in that quarterback one conversation probably are over. So don't fall for it if you're one of those guys who is in a dynasty perspective and you might get offered name brand recognition on Rodgers and they're selling them just based on name value alone. So he's probably your second quarterback in a super flex league, 2-quarterback league. But in terms of quarterbacks, we would be remiss if we didn't mention Zach Wilson, who, if you have him in Dynasty, you probably need to keep him right now. I don't know that you could get rid of him immediately just based on the fact that he still was the second pick of the draft. Yes, he didn't have a great start to his career, but he's probably a hold for me right now. Sweat it out a little bit, and then the talent for him is there. If he ends up starting with the Jets, obviously Rodgers is older. You don't know with injuries and stuff. If he ends up being a starter there, I think that he'll be able to still do better. I think his receiving core is better than what it was last year. And then there's the opportunity that he gets a chance elsewhere, which is the reason why I would keep him right now. If he is on your bench, stash him at the end and roll out. But as we continue through the Jets, running backs, Breece Hall, he was a monster before he went down. 4th in receiving yards, which we didn't even talk about. 4th in receiving yards. He was the top 10 running back, 4 touchdowns, 463 yards rushing. He slipped a bit, towards the end in dynasty value, but I don't know that he's going to slip that much more. I think he's still one of those top guys to take as the running back. So I think he'll probably slip in redraft just based on people not knowing if he'll come back fully. He's still probably worth that 3rd or 4th round pick. Now we talk running back room, Michael Carter, Izzy Abakanya, and who's the other one? Bam Knight, of course. And so with Bam Knight, Izzy, they'll probably have those mix-in roles. Michael Carter, though, is an interesting one. He also was really good at yards per touch. He had 5.3 yards per touch. It's Breece's backfield, though, so I would probably take a late-round flyer on Michael Carter just to have him again on your bench. Probably not taking the other two guys. Maybe you take a chance on Izzy just as a late-round rookie pick if you're in one of those dynasty leagues. But this is Breece's backfield completely, and I don't think there's any really a question. As we go over to the receivers, Garrett Wilson, 25% target share. That's something you like to see. We know Rodgers loves to play his favorites. I think Wilson's going to be that guy. He's going to go high in redraft, though. So if you want him, you got to go get him. We've talked about it. In the first 2 episodes that we've had. If you want a guy, you got to go get him. And it's about having fun just as much as it's about winning in fantasy. It's about enjoying your players and wanting to go get the guys that you want, that you enjoy watching. So if you want to pay up for Garrett Wilson, no problem. I think he's going to be one of those guys that's going to score a ton of touchdowns this year. Should be a fun year. Lazard, 60 catches, 788 yards, 6 scores. Probably a mid-round player. I think his value is going to also dip just based on Garrett Wilson being there in that room. But he's also one of the favorite targets of Aaron Rodgers. And so he'll probably surge at some of those games where, like, Bill Belichick takes over on, he plays 2 games against them and he likes to take away the top option. So those are probably 2 games where, you'll probably see a heavy dose of Allen Lazard rather than Garrett Wilson. So I would take him as a mid-round guy. Lazard probably going to be good. Mecole Hardman comes in. He's that slot man replacing Braxton. To me, that's one of those guys you probably shouldn't pick in your draft. Probably one of those late-round flyers. Corey Davis, unfortunately, afterthought to me, which is a bummer because he really did show a lot of talent, was a volume guy a couple seasons ago. But, unless guys get banged up, I wouldn't even look Corey Davis's way. He might not even be on the team. If they cut him, they save $10 million. So, interesting situation there. And then, you talked a little bit about the tight ends, and that's kind of where the interesting thing for me is. The Jets put out a documentary style footage of their draft room from draft night. Now, they took Will McDonald with the 15th pick, but they were ready to pick Michael Mayer. And that came to a big surprise to me because it really just shows where the value of where they think their offense needs to be. And so Rodgers he used Big Bob Tonyan a ton out in Green Bay. So I'm curious if Conklin might be that guy. And I'm not saying take him high and not even saying take him mid-round. But if you need a late-round tight end, one of those second tight ends that you're drafting in redraft, Conklin may be that guy. If you need a streaming guy, he might be that guy where he'll get you a touchdown or two. And then there's Coombs, who's an interesting one as well because they were really excited about him when they picked him just because of his athleticism. So I'm probably making him a late round guy in rookie drafts, just from a dynasty perspective on athleticism alone. Uzama's more a blocking tight end than they kind of used him that way. And so I'm not totally sure that he holds much value. He might get the, a catch here or there, but I don't know that he's going to have any consistent fantasy value.
So a couple things. The first one with Zach Wilson, I completely agree with you. You're going to stash him for this entire year in Dynasty. You're going to wait out a year. It might end up being 2 unless he gets traded. So you're going to wait and see what happens with Zach Wilson, but stash him on your roster right now. He's still very young, still has a very bright future in the NFL if he can get things going. So hold on to him right now. The second thing, Tyler Conklin, I agree with you. I think one of those guys that you just hold on your bench, and if he goes off this year and he's one of Rodgers' favorite targets, then you throw him in your lineup once in a while. So that's a really, really good option. And I think the Jets are going to be a really, really good team. Garrett Wilson, you heard it here first. He's going to be a top 10 wide receiver this year.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I think top 10 is probably the ceiling for him, if not the mid floor. And of course, if he becomes a favorite target, and scores a ton of touchdowns, that could boost him up right towards that, borderline top 5.
Completely agree.
So we talk quarterbacks, and elite quarterbacks start in Buffalo, where it's Josh Allen. Over 4,000 yards passing, 35 touchdowns in 3 straight seasons. 6 touchdowns run in his last 5 seasons. Mahomes beat him for quarterback 1 this year in points for, but over the last 2 seasons, or the last 3 seasons, Allen is the quarterback 1. Zach, what are your thoughts on the Bills and that elite quarterback?
Yeah, Josh Allen, he just continues to be the number 1 guy or the number 2 guy in fantasy football. He finished quarterback 2, 35 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. He's got to be quarterback number 2 this year. You have to draft him. He should be in the top 2, whether you go him or Patrick Mahomes. I would prefer Mahomes number 1, but if you took Josh Allen, I can't blame you. This offense circles solely around Josh Allen and what he can do with his legs, with his arm. They focus the playbook solely on Josh Allen. So he's got to be a top 2 quarterback easily this year up in Buffalo. The running back room, which we have been a little bit iffy on in recent years based on Josh Allen loves to use his legs, very crowded this year. And they added a lot of players, Lat Murray, James Cook, Damian Harris, a lot of touchdown scorers, you would say, and Lat Murray and Damian Harris, guys that can shove the ball into the end zone. James Cook, probably the every down back, I would say. up in Buffalo. He's going to be the guy. But once they get in goal line situations, you would see most likely Damian Harris and Lat Murray take those spots from James Cook. So probably a little bit less value on James Cook because you're not going to get those touchdowns unless they're probably receiving once in a while. Moving to the wide receiver room, Stefon Diggs. I mean, there's not enough good things to say about Diggs, and he finished wide receiver 4. He's perfect once again. I draft him early. He's going to be that number 1 guy once again for Josh Allen, the favorite target, and keep rolling with him. Gabe Davis, on the other hand, is a weird one because he gets so many yards. He averaged 17.4 yards per reception. However, he only finished wide receiver 36 because he doesn't get a ton of receptions. You're not going to get a huge amount of receptions. I don't think he hit 50 this past year. That's really bad value for a wide receiver 2. I think he's going to end up being a wide receiver 3, but he's too inconsistent. You're going to get a game once in a while where he's going to go for 35 points. However, are you going to want to rely on that each and every week? So Gabe Davis, a little bit iffy on him. Looking at the tight ends, Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid. I think Kincaid's going to come into this offense and take over Knox's role a little bit more. He didn't have a ton of production last year, Dawson Knox, but he was tied 4th most in tight end touchdowns. So the value at tight end, Dalton Kincaid, I mean, probably a tight end 2 right now. Draft him as a backup. I think he's going to roll into this offense very easily as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think Kincaid's probably worth that late round flyer pick. With Knox, it'll probably limit the upside for him. He did have a touchdown in all 4 of the games down the stretch, but at the same time, with Kincaid, did they line him out wide? Did they line him in the middle? That's remaining to be seen, and we've heard a lot of noise about that they might be able to spread him across. Could be good for Knox. I would probably stay away from Knox, though. And late round flyer for Kincaid, that's kind of where I would see him. He's a great dynasty pick, though, obviously. And if he goes off and he starts to gain some volume, then grab him off your waivers if he's out there. With the wide receiver room, Diggs, I mean, again, the crowd is split, though, which is interesting in the fantasy community because a lot of people are selling him right now, thinking he's going to nosedive. And this will be the year that he doesn't uphold his top 10 receiver throne. And so I don't think that this is it, though. I think he still has a couple more years. They don't really have that many good receivers outside of him. Yes, we talked Gabe Davis, but to me, it's still he's top 5 in red zone targets, top 10 in target share, and he's still in that top wave, if not the second wave of receivers for me. So Stefon Diggs, still the guy to get. If you want to sell, I understand, but the value is high right now. So that would be the only reason I would think that people would want to sell. And don't sell him low thinking you're going to fall off a cliff with him. As far as Gabe Davis goes, yes, you said wide receiver 36. And a lot of people thought he was going to be a wide receiver 2 this year. And he really didn't even uphold flex numbers. So to me, I think right now he has about a flex rating. And so, he's a late round flyer, but at the same time, he might not even be the 3rd option at pass catcher, even though he's the 3rd option at receiver or the 2nd option at receiver. Shakir, he's another interesting one because this is a guy who a lot of people had as their sleepers last year, late round guy in Dynasty, and he only had 10 catches. So he, to me, is a wash. I don't know that he's going to make much of an impact this year. And again, there's too many mouths to feed. And as we get into the running backs here, mouths to feed. It's James Cook. James Cook came in last year, found himself with Devin Singletary. They traded away Zach Moss. They brought in Naheem Hines, and all of a sudden everyone was like, oh no, James Cook is not going to get any receiving yards because they brought Naheem Hines in. But Hines did nothing. So he really didn't do anything. There were a couple games he didn't even start. He didn't even dress. And so this is James Cook's backfield. And I truly think that Damian Harris will be the only real threat to the workload. I'm not sure how much Lat Murray is going to have an impact. There's talk that he might not even make the team. It depends on how he looks in camp. And so, yes, you might have those within the 10-yard line. You give the ball to Harris, but at the same time, for the most part, the heavy workload is going to go to James Cook. You might get some touchdown vultures for Harris. Then again, we know that Josh Allen loves to run in the red zone. So that might even be a vulture for Harris. So it's kind of interesting there. You probably want to target Cook around that 5th to 6th range. Grab him in Dynasty if you don't have him, though. Right now, his value is not as high as it can be, but he's going to probably keep going up as his workload gets heavier and he starts to become a workhorse. And then as far as it goes with the other ones, Harris is probably a later round guy. I might take a chance on him just from the sense of that he could almost be like that Jamal Williams kind of guy where they just kind of give it to him when they need him in between the tackles. And Jamal Williams scored a ton of points last year from doing that. So Damian Harris, he actually scored the same amount of touchdowns in the 10-yard line that Ramondre Stevenson did. So pretty interesting. And, I think that that's something that can hold some weight. But of course, again, we know that Josh Allen likes to run and he really has used his legs this year. So I'm not sure how much upside Damian Harris actually will have.
Yeah, and I think that's a problem maybe for guys like James Cook and as well as Damian Harris. You don't know how much of the load Josh Allen's going to get. That's always a question mark with this Buffalo offense each and every year. Josh Allen has the rushing value and he's got the ball in his hands. He's going to do what he wants with it. And the coaches are going to surround Josh Allen with that. Always a question mark. Oh, are the running backs going to get involved in Buffalo? Or are they going to keep giving the ball to Josh Allen? A question every year, but I agree with you. James Cook's going to be the number one guy. And like I said, Damian Harris and maybe Lat Murray, if he's on the team, those guys are going to be goal line situations.
And I think it's actually good for Buffalo because, again, the last couple of years, there's been no stability at running back. And now I think they kind of have their direction, their vision of what they want to do at the running back position, which lets them improve at other areas. So now we get into the New England Patriots, who have a lot of question marks. And it starts at quarterback with Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi. We're not really sure what the value is. They were shopping him over the offseason. There were reports about that with Mac Jones, that he likes Zappi. It's really unsure. Zach, what do you think on the Patriots front?
So if Mac Jones is there, I mean, I don't think he has too much fantasy value. Maybe a waiver pickup if he's got a good matchup. Maybe in like week 4, you pick him up and see what he does. There's not a ton of value there just based on last year. He finished quarterback 23, and I understand he didn't have those top wide receivers, those guys to really throw the ball to. But I think this New England offense is focused solely on the running backs like it was last year. Last year it was Ramondre Stevenson as well as Damian Harris. But going to Ramondre Stevenson, running back 7. The only problem, you want more touchdowns. The best way to help that is Damian Harris is now on the Bills, and it's Ramondre Stevenson's backfield. He is going to get a ton of work this year in this offense. I might even he's probably a second round type of running back just because you're still a little bit iffy based on its New England's offense. I think second round is the spot for Ramondre Stevenson. I think he's going to have a fantastic year when it comes to fantasy. Looking at the wide receiver room, they added Juju Smith-Schuster. He was wide receiver 27 last year with Kansas City. I think he's going to be the number one guy once again. Building that chemistry with Mac Jones is going to be huge for Juju and his fantasy value. I don't think it's too high right now, just based on we've seen in the past that New England wide receivers have really struggled since Julian Edelman left. There has not been that number one guy in fantasy. So that's a question mark. Juju Smith-Schuster probably take a mid-rounds here or there, just based on where he drops in fantasy drafts, in redraft leagues, excuse me. Then looking at the tight end room, because nobody finished in the top 70 in the wide receiver room other than Juju Smith-Schuster. So there's really nobody there. But in the tight end room, it's pretty crowded as they added Mike Gesicki. He was tight end 23 for the Dolphins a season ago, and they have Hunter Henry still. He was tight end 22. I'd probably stay away from both of these guys. Maybe they're a backup in you grab one of them as a backup, but I think they're just going to be taking work away from each other, and I don't think it's going to end up helping you with fantasy type value. For dynasty owners, I'd probably put the edge for Henry, just based on the age, and Gesicki's kind of getting used to the offense this year. I think Henry will have the better year of the two. I just don't think it's a great situation to go after in redraft leagues.
Yeah, agree 100% on the tight ends. Gesicki had 5 touchdowns last year. Henry only had 2. They get rid of Jonnu Smith. But again, I know that the New England Patriots love to play 2 tight ends all the time. They'll be on the field at the exact same time. So I don't know that you can really invest a ton of value into either guy. As far as the receiver room goes, I think it's kind of top heavy. I think Juju is the guy. Tyquan Thornton, he's an iffy one as well. And then, Kayshon Boutte actually down there, he got picked late in the draft. He's a guy who played really well for LSU and tested awful at the combine. And if he decides he wants to play and try hard and all of that, he could be a potential sleeper guy to keep an eye on in your waivers. And then, of course, he's a late round flyer in those rookie drafts. So another guy to keep an eye on. But Juju had a very good year last year. He only had 3 touchdowns, though. 78 catches, 16 games. He's going to get his target share, though. So if you want a guy who's going to get volume, Juju's probably going to be that guy. But as a number 1 receiver on the Patriots, you're probably being picked in the 10th, 11th, 12th round just based on the upside and who's playing quarterback right now. So I'm not sure that he holds the value that the rest of those wide receiver ones would have of the other 31 teams. But focal point of this offense is Ramondre Stevenson, as you discussed. He scored 3 times despite 19 goal yard carries, though. So that's a little iffy, as I just mentioned before. Damian Harris scored 3 times from inside the 10. He only had 6 carries. So they bring James Robinson in to be that power back, and I don't know that he's going to be able to uphold that same value. Pierre Strong Jr. was another sleeper guy heading into last year. Not sure how much value he's going to have, but at the same time, I really think Ramondre is going to be able to grab I wouldn't say that first round. I don't even know I would say the second round of quarterbacks, probably, or of running backs, probably that 3rd or 4th rounder running back guy. Because I think a lot of guys are going to overrate him. A lot of fantasy owners are going to overrate him and be like, I have to take him at the very top. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
That's fair. I think that looking at Stevenson's year last year, what he was missing was the touchdowns. And now Damian Harris is gone. So now you look at Ramondre, and of course, yes, there's James Robinson, Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris. I mean, but it's Ramondre's backfield. And we know how much production he can get on a weekly basis. So looking at now this year, the outlook just looks way too good. And it might pan out the wrong way if you draft Ramondre too high. I wouldn't say first round, but if there's an opportunity late second round, this is a guy that's going to get a ton of production this year, and a guy to watch out for. Of course, finished running back 7 in a 2-team backfield. A 2-man backfield. He finished running back 7.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, you could go either way on Ramondre just based on the usage alone. There is upside, of course. And so even if he is overrated, he's still being picked 2nd, 3rd, 4th round. Like, he's not going to go in the 8th round. So don't expect that. He'll be up there towards the top. I'm just not sure he's in that upper echelon of running back. But we talk quarterbacks a little bit. Mac Jones is the starter. I'm not sure how long. And so the question mark remains, and For him, he's probably a low-end quarterback 2. I'd only really use him in super flex if that. But if you have another option on your roster as a quarterback in a super flex league, then you probably would start him as the second quarterback if you don't have a better quarterback option. Obviously, in super flex, you might have an option that you need an additional flex spot. So, it's an interesting dynamic there with Mac Jones. And I would say if Bailey Zappi's the starter, it's probably the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, like I said, I think he's a waiver pickup based on the matchup. I don't think he's really too high on quarterback boards. I don't even really think he's a quarterback 2 right now, just because the situation is very iffy. And we've seen Mac Jones. He's struggled in recent years. It has not been the same without that number one guy and that go-to wide receiver.
Another guy with some question marks at quarterback, the Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa. We're not really sure about his health. He missed a bunch of games last year with concussion. He got driven into the field on national television. We're not really sure on his long-term outlook. He contemplated retirement, actually, over the offseason. He decides to come back. So let's take a look now at the Miami Dolphins, and he has some weapons as well.
Yeah, Tua, you mentioned the injuries. He only played 13 games out of the 17 available because of those injuries, but he finished quarterback 15. I think it's okay to draft him probably as a backup right now, just based on the injuries. But, I mean, when he's on the field, he's going to go to his weapons like no other, and the value is going to be there. He's got 2 really strong wide receivers, and if you want them, you better go get them because they're really good, and they finished top 8 last year, both of them. I look at Tyreek Hill. He's probably number 2 in fantasy, in my opinion, in redraft leagues, right behind Justin Jefferson, just based on he's building that chemistry with Tua Tagovailoa, and the production is there for Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle, top 8. I'd probably draft him around the 3rd round, where those wide receivers are, just because he's more of a wide receiver 2 than a wide receiver 1, but 18.1 yards per reception really stands out. He's a deep threat. However, he's also getting short field receptions, and he's picking up those fantasy points that will help you out. A little bit iffy, a little bit inconsistent this year, Jalen Waddle. I think as time goes on and they get used to that Miami offense with 2 starred wide receivers, they'll definitely get used to it. But like I said, if you want those 2 guys, you better go get them because they're going to go pretty early in drafts right now. The running back room, Raheem Mostert finished running back 16 in the last 5 weeks of the season. Obviously, a lot went on with trades, running backs going down. I still think this is a pretty inconsistent backfield, maybe crowded. I think Mostert's probably a backup. Otherwise, you're probably going to stay away from this Miami backfield. It hasn't given you much in the past, and the wide receivers are the story, like I mentioned. Looking at tight end, Durham Smythe is going to be the guy with Mike Gesicki gone. Durham Smythe had 15 receptions last year. You don't want him. Stay away. You don't need him. I don't even think he's a backup. There's no need. Focus on the wide receivers on this Miami team, and you should be okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the tight ends really hold much value at all with this room. And so, enough said. As far as the receivers go, though, Tyreek, he's going to do his thing. He was only 40th, though, in red zone targets, which is very surprising. But he didn't really need it because there was a lot of those bombs down the field, and he was wide open. So he got his touchdowns from distance. So he was 40th in red zone targets. However, he was 2nd in the league in target share behind only DK Metcalf. So the volume was really there for him. And even when Tua wasn't in, they were throwing the ball to Tyreek almost every play, it felt like. And so, yes, you're right. He has a chance to finish as a wide receiver 1. You could make the argument he might be the number 2 guy. You throw Cooper Kupp in there, you throw Jamar Chase in there and potential arguments. But he's one of those number 2 guys. He's going to be the number 2, number 3, number 4 guy. You can make the case for any of those. I think we agree that Jefferson probably is still the number 1 guy. But with Hill, you got to go up and get him. If you're going to go get him, get him. Waddle, he's a guy who's probably going to get maybe even 2nd round value, if not 3rd round. But at the same time, he's that 2-headed monster. So I think the 2 of them are going to cook. Berrios, he gets brought in. He's that gadget guy. And so I'm not sure how much value he has. Chosen Robbie Anderson, he's in as well. Potential waiver edge just in case one of those first 2 guys go down. And then it's the running back room. And yeah, it's pretty crowded back there. So you have Jeff Wilson Jr., you have Raheem Mostert, you have Devin Achane as well, who was picked in the 3rd round. He's really fast, Devin Achane. He probably has the most upside of the 3 guys, but I think their value is probably going to be pretty similar. Achane's probably an intriguing dynasty pick, probably not as much from a redraft perspective. And then, yeah, it's Mostert and Wilson are probably backup options. I wouldn't take them as your running back 1. There's going to be a lot of running back 2 options that you guys will have that'll be more appealing than this room. And then as far as quarterback goes, yeah, I mean, you discussed with Tua before. He's probably the highest of high-end quarterback 2s that you could draft. He's probably that quarterback 11, quarterback 12 kind of a guy. And then, yeah, it's kind of interesting. They brought in Mike White just in the case that Tua somehow goes down again. They wanted to have a guy that they can somehow go to, and he really proved himself last year with the Jets. And now he might get a chance in Miami. But, if Tua gets another concussion, he could be done for a while. So I wouldn't sell him in the dynasty perspective, though, because you'd be selling low on Tua, and I don't know that the upside warrants selling him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you got to hold on to him right now. He's still very young. We don't think about it too much. He's still very young. You got to hold on to him. Of course, the injuries are going to be there, but they said that about Tua before he got drafted. You knew that was going to be the case. Hold on to him when he's healthy. He's really good. He's going to be just outside the top 10. I agree with you.
And he's only 25. So, to me, that screams hold.
Yeah, completely.
All right, so we turn over to the AFC North now, and another one with the quarterback controversy, but that one was put to rest as Lamar Jackson signs a mega deal. Ton of upside, and he's ready to roll. They bring in some weapons for him as well at receiver, Zach.
Yeah, and Lamar signed the contract, and the Ravens said, yeah, we're going to get you a ton of weapons now. Finally, we waited all that time. All right, here we go. Starting off with Lamar, he played 12 games. Of course, the injury that ended his season last year, but he was quarterback 14 in those 12 games. Not great from what you expected. You probably drafted him in the top 7 or 8 of quarterbacks last year. So probably not what you wanted from Lamar last season. I think it'll be better this year as long as he stays healthy. This is another guy, the legs might give out at some point and there might be injuries. So you gotta know that going in with a guy like Lamar Jackson. But I think he's probably still top 10 quarterbacks. You're going to draft him around there because he's going to give you the rushing value. Looking at the running back room, J.K. Dobbins, he only played 8 games, and he had a good stretch towards the end of the year. But in that stretch, he was only running back 39. There's a lot of inconsistencies there. Probably not what you want from J.K. Dobbins. Maybe a running back 3, probably a flex consideration. Nothing too big as the lead guy in this Baltimore backfield. A ton of injuries and new players in the wide receiver room. And you can go down the list. Rashad Bateman's going to come back from injury from last season, but they add a big guy, and Odell Beckham Jr. He's going to be probably wide receiver 1, I would say, for right now, just based on the experience that he's had in the NFL. And he's going to be working with Lamar Jackson. who's going to want to go to that number one option, it's weird because Odell's a weird one just based on the injury and he's coming back. I wouldn't draft him too high. I know there's going to be people that are going to reach on Odell. He's going to be, I think, similar to Juju. Like you said, probably wide, like 10th round, maybe 11th round. I would not reach on Odell Beckham Jr. because I don't think he's going to give you the production that you're looking for if you draft him any higher. The big guy I'm looking for in the wide receiver room is Zay Flowers, a really good player, somebody to look out for in dynasty leagues. He's going to be in that group of 4 wide receivers in those later stages of the first round in dynasty leagues. Look out for him. I think he's going to be a really good player and a guy to look out for in the future. Redraft leagues, wouldn't go too high on him this year, just based on Lamar doesn't throw to wide receivers too much, because that leads me into the tight ends. Mark Andrews was inconsistent last year. However, he finished tight end 4. Unbelievable. Without Lamar, he's not the same player, but to still manage to finish tight end 4, he's going to be probably top 2, top 3 of tight ends, a guy to look out for each and every year. Isaiah Likely, right behind him, he finished tight end 27, had 60 targets, a guy to hold on to in dynasty leagues. Once Mark Andrews maybe gets out of there, contract situation, it always happens in the NFL. Isaiah Likely is going to be the guy. So hold on to him in dynasty. I don't think he has a ton of redraft value. Maybe second or third tight end on your team. If you're even drafting a third tight end, probably no need for Isaiah Likely this year with Mark Andrews.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that Mark Andrews probably is still at the same value that he's at, just based on the fact that he has such an advantage over the other tight ends. And so he's probably in that late 3rd to early 4th round in redraft like he normally is. I don't think anything really changes from his value perspective. With Lamar, he's got a ton of upside. He's probably not – he'll probably be in the top 5 again, but I'm not sure that he'll be in the top 3. I mean, Allen, Mahomes, even Jalen Hurts, I think, has surpassed him. So he's probably right in that mid-tier of the quarterback ones per se. And so, there's the opportunity that he runs less, which is an interesting thing, which kind of leads me into Dobbins a little bit more, where they go to this new playbook now with Todd Monken coming in as the new coordinator, and they want to pass more. And so I'm not sure how much more upside Lamar will have based off of them going from Greg Roman's playbook to Todd Monken's playbook. It might not be the Lamar that you guys are all used to. He might throw the ball more. And I think that actually hurts Dobbins as well, because I'm not sure how much they're going to rush. And that leads to the wide receiver room, which is Bateman, Flowers, Odell Beckham that you just mentioned. Any one of them can emerge as the wide receiver 1. I don't know that we really know what the answer is right now. All 3 of them have the talent to emerge as the wide receiver 1. We really just don't know. So, and of course, yes, they have to compete with Mark Andrews for targets. So it's an interesting case to be made out there. With Bateman, I think, him coming back from injury, his talent can allow him to have the upside there. So I think he probably, of the 3 of them, probably still has the most upside of any of the 3. Flowers, he could be one of those guys that I almost want to compare him to like what Garrett Wilson was heading into last year, not during last year, but heading into last year, where he was in that like end of the 10th round to like 13th round, and he was going that kind of range in redraft leagues. And that's probably where he is right now. Obviously, ton of upside with him just based on the fact that he is a 1st round pick wide receiver. They don't always pan out, but a lot of the times they do. And so obviously he's going in that mid-1st round in dynasty rookie drafts, but in redraft, probably hold off on the value. And then, yeah, you mentioned Odell. He's unknown because we really haven't seen him play And that to me is the biggest question mark of their entire offense. It's Odell Beckham. And yes, everyone's going to reach on him based on name value. He's a guy I'm probably staying away from this year.
Completely agree. I mean, this wide receiver room, I like Zay Flowers. I do. I think going into this year, like you mentioned, the first round type wide receivers, a lot of the time they try to pan out, and a lot of the time they do. I think Zay Flowers is a guy to look out for. I wouldn't draft him too high in redraft, but if you're sitting there late and you're like, okay, I need another wide receiver, go get Zay Flowers. The upside is definitely there for this rookie, and the production in college, of course, was great, and that's why he was drafted in the first round. Go get him if he's sitting there late in redrafts.
Yeah, and I think back to last year, and I just mentioned Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson was a guy for me. I picked him after Gabe Davis. I picked him after Tyreek Hill. He was like my third or fourth receiver. And so, yeah, if you have that opportunity to get Zay Flowers and him not be one of your top two receivers, then you probably have to take a chance on him.
Yeah, completely agree.
All right, so we move over to another quarterback who has some stability around him, some weapons around him, and he also was in the top 5. It's Joe Burrow in the Cincinnati Bengals. Burrow finished last year quarterback 4 with 35 touchdowns. Zach, what's your outlook on the Cincinnati Bengals?
So Joe Burrow, QB4. I think he's maybe in the top 3 this year. Probably my top 3 right now. Mahomes, Allen. I would say Burrow. You can go either way with him and Jalen Hurts because those two offenses are complete, and they have a ton of guys, a ton of ways you can go. Joe Burrow, I think he's top 4 easily for those quarterbacks. If you want to draft him top 3, no problem with it. He was very consistent last year, and he has the offense to do so. Looking at the running back room, Joe Mixon, he finished running back 10. He was definitely more involved in the passing game than he was in the running game, which is something to look out for this year. Of course, Cincinnati loves to throw the ball. They have 3 wide receivers that can catch it at any moment. But looking at Joe Mixon, you're not going to get the running value. You're going to hope that he's getting those targets out of the backfield. And if so, I would probably say he's in the top 15 of running backs. I don't know if he'll finish top 10 once again this year, but I do think top 15 easily for Joe Mixon. Probably 3rd round. A lot of people love Joe Mixon in the 2nd round. I'm not one of those people. If he falls in the 3rd round, then you grab him there. I don't think the value is too high that you can grab a guy like Joe Mixon in the 2nd round. Looking at the wide receiver room, it's the same 3 as always. Jamar Chase was wide receiver 11. T. Higgins was wide receiver 18. And Tyler Boyd was wide receiver 34. The best thing about all 3 of them is they all get touchdowns. Burrow's always looking for him, and he spreads it out very nicely, and that's a great thing for fantasy owners. It's not like, okay, the top guy is going to get his touchdowns, and Jamar Chase he had 9 of them. However, not too far off. Higgins with 7, Boyd with 6. I draft all of them again. I think Higgins is probably a little bit lower, just based on I think Jamar Chase his value is just going to keep increasing. I think Burrow is going to keep going to him just a little bit more as the years go on. So I think Higgins takes a tiny bit of a drop, but him and Boyd are right next to each other. Probably Higgins higher than Boyd, but this wide receiver room, you can rely on these guys each and every year. So I think that's going to be the same as it was last year in Cincinnati. Tight ends, Irv Smith only played 8 games. He was mediocre at best for the Minnesota Vikings. Burrow didn't throw to Hayden Hurst a ton last year. He finished tight end 21. So Irv Smith, not a guy to really look out for too much, maybe a backup at tight end. And he might end up disappointing you if you do draft him as a backup. I think Cincinnati, same as always, just Mixon doing his thing, and the 3 wide receivers just going to town as they always do.
Yeah, I was in a couple leagues last year where Higgins actually was their wide receiver one. Not something I would probably advise that you do if you go running back heavy, but at the same time, there is upside for Higgins. But looking at Irv Smith first, he was one of those sleepers from last year. A lot of people had them on their list towards the back end of drafts. He didn't live up to expectations whatsoever. And there hasn't really been a consistent tight end in Cincinnati in quite a few years. Uzama was there. He had a couple good games, and then, he would just disappear for a while. And so, I'm not really sure how much upside Irv Smith has. Potential streaming option, I would say, leave him on your waivers. Let someone else pick him. As far as receiver goes, Jamar Chase led all wide receivers in red zone targets per game. He's still the second guy for me. I think I would put him at number 2 right behind Jefferson. I know that we talked, who's number 3, who's number 4. That group of receivers, I would say that Chase probably could be the number 2 just based on the upside of the red zones and, how many touchdowns he scores. Higgins, he's an interesting case because he went from wide receiver 12 in fantasy points per game to wide receiver 26. He still has the upside, but again, don't draft him as your first receiver. I do not advise that. He's your second guy, with the potential that the guy you draft third can overcome him. But at the same time, yes, there's upside when you have Joe Burrow at quarterback, always. I still think he's probably worth maybe a 4th, 5th round pick. If you can get him in the 5th, then that's pretty good because I don't know that he's going to go that late. But he's probably worth a 4th if you get a running back. If you go the 2 running backs and then you take another wide receiver, he's probably your 4th round pick if you don't want a quarterback. As far as Mixon goes, it's interesting because there was talk of them getting rid of him and, his value dipped a lot. And because of that, I think a lot of people are very unsure about him. I'm buying him. I think he'll be there. If somebody's trying to trade him in Dynasty, you maybe want to try to buy low on him. But, yeah, he's slipping in drafts. And so he's probably worth that back end 2nd, 3rd that he normally is. And you might be able to just grab him in the 3rd because I don't know how many people are valuing him as highly as he normally does.
That's completely fair. And I think if he falls to you in the 3rd, you're very happy with it. He's a really solid running back. Like we said, finished running back 10 last year. You're getting a top 10 running back in the 3rd round in an offense that just moves the ball like it's nothing. I think it's a very good value if you get Mixon in the 3rd.
Yeah, Mixon finished actually 6th in touches per game, and he finished 2nd in carries inside the 10-yard line. Yes, he only scored 5 touchdowns, but at the same time, he still has that upside. So, Mixon, for me, at least, is a buy.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. And just quickly on the wide receivers, Higgins, it's still a weird one with me because I think Chase is the number 1 guy. A lot of people have Higgins as their wide receiver 1. Don't do that. I agree with you. Don't do that. He's a wide receiver 2. And that's where he slots in. He was wide receiver 18 last year. He's going to get you the touchdowns. He's going to get you the production that you want, but don't draft him high enough that he's your wide receiver 1. It's not going to work out well for you.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little draft strategy as we get closer to when those redraft leagues start over the summer, towards the end of the summer as it gets closer to the season. But just lastly on Joe Burrow, he's probably that number 4, number 5 guy. You can make the argument for Hurts, Lamar. You can make the argument for Joe Burrow. It's one of those guys. And I can hear any which argument. So that's where his range is. He's not in the top 2 with Allen and Mahomes, though. He's in that next tier.
Yep, completely agree.
Alrighty, so now we go to Pittsburgh, where Kenny Pickett looks to take a step forward this year, and they made some great improvements to the offensive line, and they brought in some weapons.
Yeah, they did, and Pickett he finished 28th in quarterbacks last year. It was just a little bit too many turnovers, but I do like the rushing ability. So you're going to hold on to him in Dynasty because he's still young. He's going into his 2nd year. You could see improvement heading into this year from Kenny Pickett. Like I said, you got to cut down on the turnovers, though. I don't think there's much redraft value, maybe a backup, but like low end backups, Kenny Pickett slots in. So I wouldn't draft him till the really late rounds. Looking at Najee Harris, he finished running back 14, really good production in the passing game last year. That's something you want in a PPR league. Another guy that you're going to go back to, Najee Harris. He just very reliable in this Pittsburgh offense. Probably a guy you're going to take probably top 15 in running backs. I wouldn't say top 10. I don't think he's really there just based on this Pittsburgh offense is a little bit weird with Pickett at the helm. I would probably say top 15 once again for Najee Harris. The wide receiver room, they added Allen Robinson and they kept the same two guys, Deontay Johnson and George Pickens. Johnson finished wide receiver 28. He's probably, I think he's going to be a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. Maybe you put him in the flex once in a while, but low-end wide receiver 2, just because he gets that production at wide receiver. He is the number one guy. Maybe Pickens comes into that load a little bit more, but I still think Johnson has shown over the years that he is that number one guy for this Pittsburgh offense. Pickens finished wide receiver 40. I think you're just hoping that production increases this year. If you have him in Dynasty, you're very happy with him because he gave you a pretty solid season in his rookie year. And I think his production can only increase from here. Looking at Allen Robinson, he only played 10 games in LA last year, and it was a bit of a struggle when it came to Allen Robinson. He finished with his least amount of targets in his career. So looking at him, he's going to be the third guy in this Pittsburgh offense. In this wide receiver room, I wouldn't draft him too high. Maybe a late round. He's going to sit on your bench if he has a good week here or there. Looking at tight ends, Freiermuth finished tight end 7. He's a clear number one tight end. If you want to draft him, he's not near the top echelon of those tight ends, but a solid tight end 1. You're going to draft him again. They also drafted Darnell Washington. His size really stands out. That can get him some targets maybe near the goal line.
Yeah, agree. And on Darnell Washington, he's probably one of those mid to late round rookie draft guys. In terms of redraft, though, he's probably one of those streaming options, probably not going to pick him as far as redraft goes. But with Freiermuth, he has a really good floor. And you mentioned his volume. He has a ton of targets. He had 98 targets last year. 63 of those were catches for 732 yards. I think that he, of any of the guys on that team, probably has the most upside just in terms of where he can compare to the others in his specific position. Deontay, he has great value. I might take him. He is the wide receiver 1. Not going to go that high in drafts, but he's probably worth one of those mid-round picks. And then, yes, you mentioned George Pickens, but Pickens, he had 8 weeks last year where he was 50th or lower in wide receivers. So that's, a stinker for me, and I'm going to be staying away from him this year just based on that stat alone, just based on the inconsistency. You mentioned Allen Robinson, probably worth a late-round flyer, but nothing more. He's the third guy in what was a pretty inconsistent passing offense last year. But, I mentioned before they improved the offensive line, and that really, really should help Najee. And yes, he dropped to 14, I think you mentioned before, in points per game. But at the same time, he was 7th in points per game over the last 9 weeks, where he really improved towards the stretch of the season. And he had 20-plus carries in 5 of those games. So I think the volume with Najee will continue. I think they really like using him, and especially with that improved offensive line, he's probably worth that second tier of running back. Yes, he might not be a running back 1, but he's a very, very strong option as a running back 2. And then Kenny Pickett. Yeah, I think they figured out how to use his legs a little bit towards the stretch of the season. So, more upside, and he'll look to take a step forward this year. And with an improved offensive line, he may be able to get that rushing upside. But for me, he's probably still a quarterback 2. He probably is a really good super flex pick, but at the same time, I don't know that I'm taking him in a redraft league, in a one quarterback league. Dynasty, though, if he takes a step forward, it's a pretty good pick.
Yeah, completely agree. And Pickett, like I mentioned, just cut out the turnovers, and he's a solid quarterback in Pittsburgh, and a guy to look for in the future. Dynasty right now, you're happy with Kenny Pickett right now because he's going to be the starter. You're going to roll with him this year as probably a super flex option, quarterback 2 in Dynasty. And you're fine with the production that he's going to give you, especially with his legs, the rushing ability that I mentioned.
So yes, now another rushing quarterback as we head to our final team, the Cleveland Browns. And they have Deshaun Watson, signed a mega deal in a mega trade, and then didn't exactly live up to the Deshaun Watson that we all know from just a few seasons ago. Zach, start to take us through the Cleveland Browns.
Well, we'll start off with the quarterback, Deshaun Watson. He only played 6 games. I don't think he's on the fantasy radar. He finished just outside the top 30 in those 6 games, and that's great, except most of the quarterbacks in the top 30 are guys that started every game and continued to improve as the season went on. I don't think he's on the fantasy radar too much. Of course, he's probably a backup if you want him on your team. In Dynasty, he's also a backup. I think maybe a super flex option depending on the matchup here or there, but he's not going to give you the same rushing value that he gave you earlier in his career. He's going to pass it a little bit more. I think that leads to a little bit more mistakes for Deshaun Watson, maybe some more turnovers, which it may not be a great thing for Watson this year. But like I said, I think he's a backup at best in redraft as well as dynasty leagues. The running back room, Nick Chubb, he finally has a room to himself. Most likely, he's going to be the number 1 guy. He's going to get all the touches. He was running back 6 last year. He probably goes mid to late first now without a guy like Kareem Hunt. In 12-team redraft, he's definitely mid to late first, a guy to definitely look out for. The production's going to be there for Nick Chubb. The wide receiver room, Amari Cooper. And of course, Amari Cooper got traded from the Dallas Cowboys. He was okay with Dallas. He was the wide receiver 1, but he didn't give you a ton of production. You were so happy with what Amari Cooper was able to give you this past year. Finished wide receiver 10. That is absolutely amazing for a team that struggled to really have a quarterback for most of this season. Peoples-Jones, probably just a flyer. I think Elijah Moore, who's coming in, I think he takes the number 2 spot from Donovan Peoples-Jones. Looking at tight end, David Njoku, he finished tight end 11 last season. You probably wanted a little bit more touchdown production from David Njoku. They also added Jordan Akins. He had 5 touchdowns with Houston last year. I think he could end up doing that again. It's a weird one with Njoku. Probably a backup again at tight end. I wouldn't take him as your starter because I think there's going to be a little bit of inconsistencies there.
Yeah, with Watson, it's an interesting case of what they're going to do this year with him. His rushing upside wasn't that high, so therefore he might pass a little more. And then his receiver room is a little different than it was last year when they bring in Elijah Moore. But at the same time, Watson's probably a backup for me. He won't be picked for me in redraft, but he's still probably one of those quarterback 2 guys that I can see people taking a late round flyer on. If you have him in Dynasty, probably starting him in the Superflex at least, just from the rushing upside potential. But at the same time, it's Nick Chubb's rushing ability that's going to really lead the Browns, I think, this year. And yeah, I think you're right in projecting that he's a late first round pick, mid to late first, depending on how high you value him. He's probably right in that range. I think that what's interesting is he doesn't have Kareem Hunt there. And in week 18, they actually used him a lot at receiver. And, getting those check downs out, he ran around on 71% of the dropbacks. He was 5 of 6 on targets. and he caught for 45 yards. So interesting that Chubb was used there as a receiver. And I really think that this year he's going to be able to have that. I'm not sure if they're going to bring another guy in. And, there's some rumors out there that they might be looking at another running back. But for now, it's Chubb's room. And it's only Chubb's room. And it's been a long time coming since the Kareem Hunt, where they were basically splitting carries down the middle, just cratering a lot of the value there. At receiver, yes, Cooper. He is, again, one of those top, if you're going to say a back end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2, he's right there. He was 12th in red zone targets, and he was 12th in deep targets for the entire league. 16th in target share, 26% of the targets went to him. And so, yes, I think that Cooper, it's again going to be his room. They bring in Elijah Moore, which to me is a bit of a question mark because of just the way that the Browns play, where they really don't play 3 wide receivers out at the same time. They like Donovan Peoples-Jones as one of those guys out wide. So I'm curious to see if Elijah Moore actually gets on the field enough to make a fantasy impact where they're using 3 at the same time. That said, Donovan Peoples-Jones, probably a late round flyer for me, but there's upside just based on the fact that he can get open when he's deep. And therefore, I think that he's a potential guy that could have a couple big weeks as we head into this season. And then David Njoku, we had 58 catches, 628 yards, and 4 touchdowns in 14 games. Probably a tight end 2, if not a very back end tight end 1. But for me, Njoku's a guy who he can catch the ball and run. If they use him more in the offense, I could see more volume coming his way as they try to guard those outside receivers. So Njoku for me, he's a flyer that I would take at the end of drafts. And if you have him in Dynasty, you probably were pretty happy just with the volume based off of what his projections were from last season.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the Browns, like a lot of teams, I think those top 2 guys, Chubb and Cooper, this offense kind of focuses around those 2 and what they can do, and everybody else after that, it's pretty good value. Njoku, like I said, the touchdowns, you want a little bit more, but I don't know if that'll come if they're focusing solely on Chubb and Cooper. It should be interesting if the Browns do add another running back behind Chubb. That will hurt his value, definitely, Nick Chubb. But for Nick Chubb fans, fantasy owners, you're hoping that Nick Chubb finally gets his time as that running back 1 and the sole guy in that backfield.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see who's even out there for them to add. A lot of the guys that are out there kind of have a similar style, per se, to Nick Chubb. When you talk Leonard Fournette, you talk Ezekiel Elliott, even Kareem Hunt is out there, but they've already made it known that they don't really want him to return. But yeah, those first 2 guys really have a similar style to how Chubb plays. So I'm not really sure it's going to be one of those guys. You might get a minor guy at running back. And so I'm not sure how much it'll hurt his value. I still think that he's probably that back end first round at the worst.
Yeah, definitely agree with you.
All right. I think we did it and we hit all the teams. Next week, we are going to be back here taking on the NFC as we now head out west and we head to the NFC South.
Should be a good episode.
And until next time, Zach Malamud and Brett Malamud signing off here. It's Third Round Reversal, the fantasy football podcast. Have a good night, everyone, and enjoy your Memorial Day weekend.